It is the summer of 1945. A man is sitting in a house in Los Angeles and he is not eating. Not because there is no food, because he cannot keep it down. He has been this way for months. He subsists, by his own account, on peanut butter and ice cream, the only two things his stomach will accept. He has lost so much weight that the people who knew him before say he looks like a different person. His face has changed, not just thinner. Something behind the eyes is different. Something that was there before is gone, and something that was not there before has taken its place. He cannot sleep. When he does sleep, he wakes up. He wakes up to the sound of planes exploding, to men falling through the air, to a sky over Germany that is full of fire and anti-aircraft shells, and the particular sound that a B-24 Liberator makes when it is hit and going down. And the crew inside, it knows there is nothing left to do. He has heard that sound more times than he can count. Over Kiel, over Bremen, over Ludwigshafen, over Brunswick and Frankfurt and Berlin. He has heard it and he has flown on because the mission required him to fly on. And now he is sitting in a house in Los Angeles in the summer of 1945, and the sound follows him into the silence and he cannot make it stop. He does not talk about it, not to his father, who fought in the First World War and would understand more than most, not to his friends from before the war, the people he had dinner with and made films with and laughed with in the years when the world was simpler, not to the press which wants to celebrate him, wants to put him on the cover of magazines in his uniform and call him a hero. He does not talk about it to anyone. His name is James Stewart. The world calls him Jimmy. He is 37 years old. He is one of the most famous men in America. He has an Academy Award on a shelf somewhere. He has made films that people love. He has a voice that is so distinctive, so unhurried and warm, that the sound of it makes people feel that everything is going to be all right. He does not feel that everything is going to be all right. He has not felt that way since before Germany. And he is not going to talk about it, not now, not later, not ever. This is the story of what James Stewart carried home from the war, and what he did with it, and what it cost him, and what it gave him, and why the man you see on the screen in the Christmas film every December is not the man he was before the planes, but something different. Something forged in the particular fire of what he saw over Europe and never told anyone about. He was born on the 20th of May, 1908, in a small town in western Pennsylvania called Indiana. The name of the town is one of those American coincidences that seems almost too neat to be true, but it is true. Indiana, Pennsylvania. Population a few thousand. Coal country, hill country, the kind of place where the families have been there for generations. And the hardware store on the main street has been in the same family since before anyone can quite remember. The hardware store was the Stewart family business. J.M. Stewart and Company, established in 1853, run by his grandfather, then his father, Alexander Stewart, a man of strong opinions and stronger faith who attended the Presbyterian Church every Sunday and expected his children to do the same, and who had a way of making his expectations known that did not leave much room for discussion. Alexander Stewart was not a cold man. He was, by every account of those who knew him, a man of genuine warmth and genuine conviction, who believed that there was a right way to live and that living it was not a matter of preference, but of duty. He had served in the First World War. His father had served in the Civil War. The military was not a profession in the Stewart family. It was an obligation, something men did when their country needed them, not because it was heroic, but because it was simply what you did. This is the air James Stewart breathed from childhood: duty, service. The idea that what you owed the world was more important than what the world owed you. He was a quiet boy, tall and thin, with a slow drawl that made him sound like he was thinking carefully before he spoke, which he usually was. He built model airplanes in his room. He played the accordion, badly but enthusiastically, in a way that his family tolerated, with the resigned affection that families bring to musical ambitions that show more heart than talent. He was fascinated by aviation from very early on, the kind of fascination that goes beyond interest into something closer to longing. He wanted to be in the air. He always had. He took his first flying lesson at 17 and never lost the feeling it gave him of the world becoming clear and simple in a way that it was not always clear and simple on the ground. He went to Princeton because his father told him to go to Princeton, and he studied architecture because it seemed like a reasonable thing to study, and he was good at it, good enough to continue to graduate school. But what happened at Princeton was not architecture. What happened at Princeton was theater. He joined the drama club almost by accident, appeared in a production almost by accident, and discovered, not entirely by accident, that the thing that had been looking for an outlet in him all those years in Indiana had found one. He graduated in 1932 and went to Cape Cod to join a summer stock company called the University Players, a group of young actors who were serious about the work in the way that only young people who have just discovered what they want to do with their lives can be serious. One of the other actors in the company was Henry Fonda. They became friends immediately, in the way that people become friends when they recognize in each other something that they have been looking for without knowing they were looking for it. The friendship would last for the rest of their lives. Broadway came next, and then Hollywood, because that is how it worked in those years. MGM signed him in 1935, and he was in Los Angeles by the end of the year, making the adjustment from theater to film that is not as simple as it sounds and that many theater actors never fully make. Stewart made it. He made it because the camera found in his face and his voice and his particular quality of unhurried presence something that translated onto the screen with unusual power. He was, in the language of the industry, natural. He did not seem to be performing. He seemed to be living. And audiences, who can feel the difference even when they cannot name it, responded. He worked through the late 1930s with a consistency and a range that is easy to underestimate now because the films have become so familiar. You can't take it with you in 1938. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 1939. The film that made him more than a movie star, made him a symbol of something. The honest man who goes to the corrupt place and does not become corrupt, who stands up and keeps standing up even when standing up costs everything he has. He received an Academy Award nomination for that film. The following year, 1940, he won the Academy Award for Best Actor for The Philadelphia Story, a role that he himself believed was not his best work, that he thought the award was partly compensation for being overlooked the year before. He was 32 years old. He was the most sought-after actor in Hollywood. He had more offers than he could accept, and more money than he had expected to have, and a life in California that was comfortable and successful in every measurable way. He was also looking at Europe, because in 1939 and 1940, what was happening in Europe was impossible to ignore, even from California, even in the middle of a successful career. He had grown up with the stories of the First World War, his father's stories, the obligation his family had always felt towards service, and he had his pilot's license. He had been flying for years, commercially licensed since 1938. He looked at what was happening overseas, and he understood, in the quiet, deliberate way he understood most things, that it was going to require something from him. In March of 1941, before Pearl Harbor, before America was officially at war, James Stewart enlisted in the United States Army as a private. He was the first major Hollywood star to do so. He was 32 years old, past the standard age limit for pilot training. He was underweight when he was first examined and was initially rejected. He hired people to help him gain enough weight to pass the physical. He was determined to fly, and he was going to fly, and that was the end of the discussion. The Army, once they had him, was not sure what to do with him. They did not want to send a famous face into combat, A famous face that was shot down over Germany would be a propaganda disaster. So they assigned him to training duties, to recruiting films, to the kind of useful but entirely safe work that kept him on American soil and kept the Army's asset alive and unrisked. Stewart did not accept this arrangement. He pushed. He requested. He appealed to every superior officer he could find. He said in various ways and on various occasions that he could not send men into danger without knowing what he was sending them into, that he could not ask something of people that he had not asked of himself, that the commission meant nothing if it was only decoration. He finally got his combat assignment in the fall of 1943. He arrived in England as the commander of the 703rd Bomb Squadron, 445th Bombardment Group, based at RAF Tybenham in Norfolk. He was flying B-24 Liberators, 4-engine heavy bombers that carried their crews over Germany at altitudes between 12 and 20,000 feet to drop their loads on targets that the 8th Air Force had decided needed to be destroyed. The casualty rates in the 8th Air Force bomber groups were among the highest of any military assignment in the entire war. The German anti-aircraft batteries were accurate, and the Luftwaffe fighter pilots were skilled, and the B-24, which was a capable aircraft in many respects, was not forgiving when it was hit. When a B-24 went down, the crew had seconds to decide what to do, and often the decision was made for them by the physics of a burning, spinning aircraft at 15,000 feet over enemy territory. Stewart flew his first combat mission on the 13th of December, 1943, a raid on a U-boat facility in Kiel. He led the High Squadron. 3 days later, he led a mission to Bremen. He assigned himself to missions the way he had always done things, deliberately, completely, without reservation. He refused to be protected. He refused to fly only the easier missions, the ones with lighter defenses and shorter routes and smaller risks. His men were flying everything. He was going to fly everything. He said it simply, in the few words he ever allowed himself on the subject, "I just cannot sit here and send these fellows to death without knowing myself what I am sending them into." That sentence is the key to everything that happened to him over Germany, and to everything that happened to him after. He was not afraid of bombs or bullets by the account of the men who flew with him. What he was afraid of, the thing that was always with him on those missions, was making a mistake that would cost someone else their life. He was a commander. Every decision he made in the air had consequences for the men in the planes behind him and beside him. The altitude he chose, the heading he took, the moment he decided to turn for home, all of it could mean the difference between his crews surviving and his crews not surviving. He felt the weight of that on every mission, and he carried it with him when he landed, and he carried it to the next mission, and the one after that. On one mission, a raid on Ludwigshafen in January of 1944, a bombardment group accompanying his squadron flew 40 degrees off course. When Stewart informed the group lead of the error, he was told that Stewart was the one who was mistaken. He was not mistaken. He knew the heading, but he followed the group anyway and helped his crews survive an attack by 60 Luftwaffe fighters that hit the off-course group instead. He was promoted for his actions that day. In the 445th alone, which was just one of the groups Stewart served with, the losses were staggering. On a single mission to Kassel in September of 1944, which Stewart was not leading that day, the 445th lost 25 of 30 aircraft, 136 men, most of them known to him by name. He was not in the air that day, but he was on the ground when the planes did not come back, and the ground was not easier than the air. The ground was, in some ways, harder. By the early months of 1945, Stewart had been grounded by his superiors. The word they used, in the language of the time, was flak happy. What it meant was that his nervous system had absorbed more than it could continue to absorb without breaking. The nightmares had started, the shakes, the inability to keep food down. The moments in the briefing room when the pressure built to a point where he had to step outside because he could not breathe. He had been in the air over Germany more times than his official record shows because he had ordered certain missions to go uncounted, had refused to have them logged because he did not want to be pulled from flying, before he felt he had done what he came to do. He was grounded anyway. He came home in August of 1945 with the rank of colonel, 2 distinguished flying crosses, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the French Croix de Guerre, and something that had no official name in 1945. That would not have an official name until 1980, but that the men who had it called various things in those years: shell shock, battle fatigue, combat exhaustion, flak happy. The thing that happens to a mind that has been asked to absorb more violence and more loss and more fear than a mind was built to absorb. And that absorbs it anyway. And that carries it forward into the rest of life, whether the carrying is wanted or not. He returned to a house in Los Angeles. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He lost weight that he did not have to lose. His acting career, which had been at its peak when he left, seemed to him from the inside of this new condition like something that belonged to another person. The superficiality of Hollywood, he said to more than one person in those months, seemed impossible to take seriously after what he had seen. Men fell out of burning aircraft over Germany. 13 planes gone in one mission. 130 men. He knew their names. He could not make himself care about box office performance. MGM offered him a film about his own wartime exploits. A patriotic picture, Jimmy Stewart the hero flying over Frankfurt, winning the war. He said no immediately. He would not talk about the war. He was not going to talk about the war, not in a picture, not in an interview, not to a journalist, not over dinner, not to his oldest friends. He said the world had witnessed enough suffering. He wanted to make a comedy. Frank Capra called. They had known each other before the war, Capra and Stewart. Capra was also just home from the war, also struggling with the return to a world that did not fully understand what he had come back from. He had a story. It was about a man named George Bailey, who lives in a small town and spends his whole life giving up his own dreams to take care of other people, and who reaches a point on Christmas Eve where he cannot see any reason to go on living. An angel shows him what the world would look like if he had never been born. Stewart did not want to do a film about a man who wants to die. He said so. Capra talked him into it. They began shooting in the spring of 1946. The set of It's a Wonderful Life was, by the account of almost everyone who worked on it, not a comfortable place. Donna Reed, who played George Bailey's wife, said years later that the set was tense, that the people on it were very tense. That Stewart in particular carried something with him that made the air around him feel different from other actors on other sets. What she was observing, though she did not have the language for it, in 1946, was a man in the middle of what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, being asked to play a character who is also in the middle of something very close to the same thing. George Bailey is not a combat veteran, but George Bailey is a man who has absorbed more than he can continue to carry, who has given everything he had to everyone around him, and who has arrived at a night in December where he is standing on a bridge looking at black water and thinking that the world would be better without him in it. Stewart did not have to find that feeling from the outside. He brought it from the inside. He carried it in from the house in Los Angeles where he was not sleeping and not eating. He carried it in from Germany, from the missions, from the 13 planes and the 130 men. He carried it onto the set and he put it into George Bailey, and the camera found it there, as the camera always finds the thing that is real. And what came out was one of the most honest portrayals of psychological despair in the history of American film. There is a scene in It's a Wonderful Life where George Bailey, at the end of his ability to hold things together, explodes. He yells at his children. He yells at his wife. He picks up a model bridge that his son has built and throws it on the floor. It is a scene of a man shattering under the weight of everything he has been carrying, and it is the scene that the director Frank Capra tried to film a second time after the first take, because the first take had been so raw and so complete that he wanted to be sure he had captured it properly. Stewart looked at Capra after the first take and said, "Frank, I cannot do that again. Don't ask me." He had opened something during that take that he had been keeping closed since Germany. He had found it in George Bailey because George Bailey was not entirely different from what he was carrying himself. And he was not going to open it again. Not even for the film. Not even for Capra. Capra used the first take. The film was released in December of 1946, and it was not an immediate success. It did not recoup its production costs in its initial run. Some reviewers found it dark. Too dark for a Christmas picture. The protagonist wants to die. The town without him is a nightmare. The ending, which resolves everything, was not enough for some critics to justify the journey through the middle. Stewart himself said that making the film had been therapeutic, that playing George Bailey had given him somewhere to put things he could not put anywhere else, that the on-screen breakdown, the throwing of the model bridge, the yelling at the family, the night on the bridge, had released something in him that nothing else had been able to reach. He meant it. His wife, Gloria, whom he married in 1950, 5 years after the war, has spoken about the symptoms that stayed with him into their marriage. The nightmares, the sweats, the shakes, the moments in the night when he would wake suddenly from a sound that no one else heard and lie still in the dark for a long time after. She did not know, in the early years, what the sounds were. She understood eventually that they were German, that they came from a sky over Germany that Stewart had never left entirely, that some part of him was still there, still flying the missions, still counting the planes that did not come back. He never talked about it to her either, not fully, not the way she would have needed him to talk about it for it to be something she could help him carry. He had decided before he came home that the war was his to keep, that the people who had not been there could not understand it, and that trying to explain it to them would not help and might make things worse, might make what he needed to hold together begin to come apart. He held it together by working. He worked with a ferocity in the 1950s and 1960s that is striking even in an industry where hard work is the norm. He made westerns with Anthony Mann that were unlike any westerns that had been made before. Psychologically complex films about men who carry damage through the landscape of the American West and who cannot outride it no matter how far they go. Winchester, 73. Bend of the River. The Naked Spur. The Man from Laramie. Films about obsession and violence and the cost of what men do to each other and to themselves. He was not playing heroes in these films. He was playing men who are broken in ways they do not fully understand and who are trying to find a way to live with the breaking. He worked with Alfred Hitchcock. Rear Window. The Man Who Knew Too Much. Vertigo. Films about men whose psychological wounds determine what they see and what they do, about how the inside of a damaged mind shapes the outside world. Vertigo, in particular, which Stewart has said was the hardest film he ever made, is the story of a man undone by fear and loss, paralyzed by what he has seen and cannot unsee, driven to recreate the past because the present is unbearable. It is one of the most psychologically honest films ever made, and Stewart's performance in it is at the center of that honesty in a way that critics did not fully understand when it was released. They understand it better now. He also kept flying. He stayed in the Air Force Reserve after the war, returning to military service on weekends and during exercises, continuing to accumulate flight hours, continuing to do the thing that had changed him so fundamentally. In 1966, he flew a bombing mission over North Vietnam as a brigadier general. He was 57 years old. He was not required to fly the mission. He flew it because he believed, as he had always believed, that he could not ask someone else to do something he was not willing to do himself. He retired from the Air Force Reserve in 1968 after nearly 3 decades of service. He was 60 years old. His son Ronald, from Gloria's first marriage, the stepson he had raised as his own, was killed in Vietnam in 1969. He was 24 years old. Stewart did not talk about that either, not publicly, not in the way that public grief is usually managed in the world of celebrity. He went to the memorial service. He said what fathers say when they are trying to hold themselves together for the people around them. And he carried it the way he had always carried things, without speaking of it, without putting it down. He lived a long life after the war. He made films into the 1980s. He was given every honor the industry could give. The American Film Institute ranked him the 3rd greatest male actor in American film history. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1985. He was beloved in a way that very few public figures are beloved, genuinely and without complication, by the audiences who had grown up with his face on their screens. He died on the 2nd of July, 1997. He was 89 years old. He had outlived the war by 52 years, and he had not spoken of what the war had done to him in all that time. Not in any interview, not in any memoir, not in any of the retrospectives that Hollywood made of his career. He was asked about his service in every decade by every kind of journalist, and his answers were always the same. He spoke of duty. He spoke of the men he had served with. He expressed respect and gratitude and a careful, measured pride. He did not speak of the nightmares. He did not speak of the shakes. He did not speak of the planes that did not come back, or the names of the men who were in them. He did not speak of standing in a briefing room in England in the winter of 1944 and feeling the pressure build until he could not breathe. He kept it. He was a man who kept things. What he gave instead was the work. 50 years of films, not all of them great, but many of them great, and all of them informed in some way by the man who came back from Germany in 1945 and was not the same man who had left. The darkness in the westerns, the psychological complexity of the Hitchcock films, the breakdown scene in It's a Wonderful Life that he could not film a second time because what he had opened was too real to open twice. All of it came, in part, from the thing he would not speak of. His biographer, Robert Mattson, who spent years researching his wartime service and speaking with the men who flew with him, has said that Stewart was afraid not of bombs and not of bullets, but of making a mistake that would cost someone else their life. That was his particular wound, not the violence he witnessed, though the violence was real and terrible and scarring. The fear of being responsible for another person's death, the burden of command, the weight of the decision that has to be made at 15,000 feet over Germany in 30 seconds, with 60 Luftwaffe fighters coming in from the west. He made those decisions over and over for 18 months. And he got it right often enough that his men came home when other men did not. And he got it wrong sometimes too, or thought he got it wrong, or was unable, in the particular calculus of the trauma he carried, to separate the missions that went right from the missions that went wrong. Because the ones that went wrong were louder in the night than the ones that went right. His daughter, Judy, has spoken about waking up at night to the sound of her father, not crying, not calling out, simply awake in the dark, in the particular silence of a man who has learned, over many years of practice, to be alone with what he carries. He carried it to the end. In 2016, a book was published called Mission: Jimmy Stewart and the Fight for Europe. It was the first serious attempt to document his wartime service in full, to follow the missions and the numbers and the names of the men, and to understand what the 18 months over Germany had done to the man who came home from them. The author Robert Mattson had spent years tracking down the men who had flown with Stewart, the few who were still alive to speak, and what they told him was what his family had always known and what he himself had never said: that he was changed, that the man who came back was not the man who went, that the thing that had been done to him in the air over Germany was real and lasting and permanent, and that it had informed every film he made afterward, and that the performance everyone loves most, the one they watch every Christmas, the one with the bridge and the black water and the man who cannot see a reason to go on, was not a performance at all. It was a confession. He was telling you, in the only language he had found that could say it, what it felt like to be him in the years after Germany. The weight, the darkness, the night when the darkness is so complete that the bridge over the water seems like the only honest answer. And then the light, the people who loved him, the town that needed him, the thing that was worth going back to, even carrying what he carried, even with the nightmares and the shakes and the sound of planes that only he could hear. He went back. Every morning for 50 more years, he went back. He did not talk about the war, but he told you about it. Every December, in a film that half of America watches on Christmas Eve, he tells you about it still. His name was James Stewart. He was born in Indiana, Pennsylvania, on the 20th of May, 1908. He was a hardware store owner's son who wanted to fly and became the most beloved screen actor of his generation, and who carried home from the sky over Germany something that he never put down and never spoke of, and that informed every honest thing he ever did in front of a camera for the rest of his life. He is in the film. He is in every frame of it, not George Bailey, James Stewart. Watch him sometime. Watch the bridge scene. Watch the moment just before the breakdown, when he is sitting at the desk and the thing he has been holding together begins to come apart. Watch his face in that moment and understand that what you are seeing is not acting. You are seeing a man telling the truth in the only way he knew how. Good night. There is something I want to return to because I think it is the most important thing about this story, and I have not yet said it as plainly as it deserves to be said. James Stewart did not talk about the war because he believed that talking about it would not help. This was not cowardice. It was not denial in the clinical sense. It was a decision made carefully by a man who had thought carefully about most things in his life, that the people around him could not carry what he was carrying, and that asking them to try would only distribute the damage without reducing it. He may have been wrong about this. The people who study trauma now, the psychologists and the therapists who work with veterans in the century after Stewart's war, would say that he was wrong about it, that keeping it creates its own particular wound, that the wound of silence is different from the wound of the event, but not smaller, that the nightmares persist longer in the dark than they would in the light. But he made the decision he made, and he made it with the materials he had, which were a generation's understanding of what men were supposed to do with the things they had seen and done in wartime. And those materials were: carry it, work hard, keep going. Do not bring the war into the house. Do not ask the people who were not there to understand what they cannot understand. Do not make your damage someone else's problem. He did not make his damage someone else's problem. He made it his own, and he carried it, and he put it into his work, and his work is what remains. What also remains, in a more difficult way, is the question of what he might have been if the war had not done what it did to him. He was 33 years old when he enlisted. He was at the peak of his gifts. The Philadelphia Story, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the films of the late 1930s show a young man who was genuinely exceptional, who had a lightness and a warmth and a particular comic timing that was, in that period, perhaps the finest of his generation. He did not entirely lose those qualities after the war, but they became something different. The lightness acquired a weight that had not been there before. The warmth became complicated by the darkness that sat underneath it. The films he made after 1946 are different from the films he made before, and the difference is the war. And whether you consider that difference an improvement or a loss depends on what you value in art. Some people think the post-war Stewart is the greater artist. The psychological complexity of vertigo, the controlled fury of the Westerns, the specific kind of despair he brought to George Bailey, none of that was available in the young man who made the Philadelphia Story. It required the war. It required the sky over Germany and the planes that did not come back and the years of nightmares in the dark to produce the instrument that could play those notes. Others would say, and they are not wrong, that this is a cruel way to think about a human being, that we should not be grateful for the damage because the damage produced great art. That James Stewart at 60, carrying the shakes and the nightmares and the sound of engines that only he could hear, was paying a price that no film, however great, is worth. Both things are true. They are always both true. In the lives of people who have been changed by what they have witnessed. The change produces something. The something is real and sometimes remarkable. The price of it is also real, and the price is also remarkable. And the two exist together without resolving each other. He paid the price every night for 50 years. The work is what he left in exchange. I want to tell you one more thing, and it is a small thing, but small things are sometimes the truest ones. After the war, Stewart kept a model of a B-24 Liberator in his study at home. The same kind of aircraft he had flown over Germany. He kept it for the rest of his life. He did not display it prominently. It was just there, in the room where he worked and read and thought. A small metal model of the airplane that had changed him. His family has said that he never explained why it was there. He never said, "This is to remember the men," or "This is to remind myself of what I owe," or "This is the thing that cost me what it cost me, and I keep it in sight because I need to see it." He never explained it. He just kept it there, in the room, in the corner of the eyes field, a small reminder of the thing he had never spoken of and would not speak of, and that had made him, in the end, into whatever it was he became. The model is still there, in the photographs of his study, small and dark against the light from the window. A B-24 Liberator, 4 engines, a crew of 10, the kind of aircraft that flew at 15,000 feet over Germany and sometimes came back, and sometimes did not. He knew which ones did not come back. He knew the names of the men who were in them. He never said the names out loud, not in public, not in a way that anyone has recorded. He kept them the same way he kept the model. In the room, in the corner of the eye, present but not spoken of, carried but not put down. That is the secret he carried from the war. Not a dramatic secret, not a scandal, not a hidden act or a private shame. The secret of what it costs a person to absorb what he absorbed, and to carry it forward without speaking of it, and to put it into the work, and to go on, morning after morning, year after year, decade after decade, with the thing in the corner of the room and the names in the corner of the mind. He went on. He always went on. That is perhaps the most James Stewart thing about the whole story. He just went on. His name was James Maitland Stewart. He was born in Indiana, Pennsylvania. He flew bombers over Germany. He came home, and he did not speak of what it cost him, and he put it into the work, and the work is still here. 50 years after the last mission, and 27 years after his death, playing on screens every Christmas Eve in millions of homes across the country. George Bailey stands on the bridge. The water is dark and cold below. The snow is coming down. And then something shifts and he goes back. Back to the town, back to the family, back to the life. He goes back because it is worth going back to, even carrying what he carries, even in the dark, even with the cost of it. That is what James Stewart put in that scene. That is what the war taught him to put there. Not the knowledge of despair, which he already had. The knowledge that you go back anyway, that the going back is the thing. He went back every morning for 50 years, and on Christmas Eve, in the film, George Bailey goes back too. Good night, my friend, wherever you are listening from tonight, in whatever room, in whatever quiet hour. The man on the bridge goes back, he always goes back. Good night. One thing more, before I let you go. There is a photograph taken in 1942 before Stewart went overseas. He is in his uniform, second lieutenant, and he looks exactly like you would expect James Stewart to look. Young, lean, with that particular open quality his face always had in front of a camera. The quality that made audiences trust him before he had said a single word. He looks like a man who has not yet been anywhere he cannot come back from. There is another photograph taken in 1944, 2 years later. Same man, same uniform, but major now, not lieutenant. He is standing near an aircraft somewhere in England. He is 36 years old in this photograph. He looks 50, not in the way of a man who has aged badly or who has been careless with himself. In the way of a man who has been somewhere that the photographs cannot show, and who has carried it back in his face. 2 years. The distance between those two photographs is 2 years, and something that has no name in the photographs themselves. Robert Matson, who used both photographs in his book, has said that they tell the story better than anything he could write. A before and an after. The same man, unrecognizable. That is what the war did in 2 years to one man. Multiply it across the 16 million Americans who served, across the ones who came home and the ones who did not, and the ones who came home in ways that were not entirely coming home, and you begin to understand something about the country that existed after 1945 and about the silence that settled over so much of it. The men who did not talk about what they had seen, who went back to work and went to church and watched the baseball and raised their children and carried their particular Germany or their particular Pacific in the room, in the corner, without speaking of it. James Stewart was one of those men. He was also, because of his gift and his particular access to the camera, the one who showed you what it looked like from the inside. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, in the work. Watch the scene. Watch the bridge. Watch the face of the man standing on it before he knows anyone is watching, before the angel arrives, before the story resolves itself into the ending that Christmas requires. Watch the face. That is the face of a man who knows something about the dark, who has been to the dark by a specific route, over specific cities, on specific nights, and who came back carrying specific names that he never said out loud. He put it in the scene. He put it there because Frank Capra asked him to, and because he had it to put, and because putting it there was the closest he could come to saying it. He said it the only way he knew how. And every December, for 78 years now, America sits down in the dark and watches him say it, and feels it, and does not always know quite why. Now you know why. His name was James Stewart. He flew 20 missions over Germany, and he came home, and he did not speak of it, and he went on. He always went on. That is the whole of it. And the whole of it is enough, and the whole of it is more than enough, because the going on was the hardest thing, and he did it every day for 52 years after the war ended. The man on the bridge goes back. He always goes back. Good night.